Gordon, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Nick. And good morning, Freedom Warriors. Lydia and I are just so proud to be here with you, standing shoulder to shoulder in a great cause. The Communist Party of China owns the Democratic Party of Korea, Minju. Now, senior Minju leaders, former President Moon Jae-in, current criminal and leader of Minju, Lee Jae-myung, they act as if they're living in the 7th century when large portions of Korea were ruled by the Tang dynasty of China. And that means Moon and Yi and many others in Minju, they believe that they're vassals of the Chinese state, the grand celestial court, as we saw from Matara's pictures. Those images clearly demonstrate the mentality of Minju leaders. This is important because we're living in the 21st century, and in the 21st century, Minju is allowing China to infiltrate the Republic of Korea. And we'll start in 2019. In 2019, we first started to hear reports of concerns about election integrity, about the integrity of the system run by the National Election Commission. Now, the NEC dismissed these concerns, said there was no possibility of fraud, said their system couldn't be hacked. Well, the North Koreans hacked that system many times. The National Intelligence Service of South Korea, the spies, they were given the test to see if they could hack the system, and they did so. But nonetheless, NEC would not budge. And that had consequences, because on April 15th, 2020, the National Assembly elections, the balloting resulted in an unexpected and overwhelming victory for Minju leaders, as early ballots tipped district after district to the leftists. There were so many uniformly narrow victories that it was statistically improbable. And indeed, one expert looked at this and said, either God did it, or the election was rigged. Well, let me give you a spoiler alert. God didn't do it. What we saw were counterfeit ballots, there were chain of custody issues, and there were throughput voting speeds that were not humanly possible. The NEC destroyed evidence, and they refused to hear challenges. And indeed, they even filed charges against people who said, raised the possibility of fraud. They even filed charges against people who were urging people not to vote early. What does all of this have to do with China? Well, we saw two things that were extremely suspicious. First of all, the National Election Committee uses servers from Huawei Technologies of China. And throughout the last decade or so, we've seen more and more evidence that China has been able to control those servers remotely from Beijing. But also, there were reports that Minju actually cooperated with Tencent, the Chinese internet giant, to develop algorithms to switch votes from early votes to the final election. And that is how we saw all of these election irregularities. The election irregularities continued to 2 years later, 2022. Fortunately, Yoon Suk-yeol, the president, People Power Party, he was elected, but he was elected by a much smaller margin than polling indicated. And the reason is that early ballots delivered late eroded his margin. Unfortunately, there was no serious investigation of this. And again, 2 years after that, 2024, the second National Assembly election, there was again an overwhelming victory for Minju leaders that polling said did not exist. Now, you can have one election where the polling and ballot results are off, but what we have seen in South Korea this decade is election after election where the polling and the ballot results are so far apart. And that says that God didn't intervene, that this indeed was fraud. We are also seeing, of course, the National Election Commission this year admitted that they've been hiring Chinese nationals to count ballots in South Korea's elections. How could this be? Well, it's not just, of course, the Chinese infiltration of the South Korean election system. It is also an infiltration of society as a whole. Our friend David Maxwell of the Center for Asia-Pacific Strategy says China's actions in South Korea have been covert. And so therefore, sometimes it is hard to find evidence of it. But he says there are clear signs that the Chinese have been infiltrating South Korean society. And that's because of Minju's permission to do that. So for instance, China's conducting a campaign against the United States, all other countries, and South Korea. It's part of their unrestricted warfare campaign. And that you have the three warfares: psychological warfare, legal warfare, and media warfare. And they are all being conducted in South Korea today. China in the Republic of Korea has got its Confucius Institutes. Even more damaging, they are in the secondary schools of South Korea, getting young South Koreans to adopt pro-China, pro-North Korean narratives. China's been targeting senior South Korean officials, and of course, it's using Chinese-linked entities to take stakes in Korean media outlets, something that we've also seen in other countries like Taiwan. The Communist Party's United Front Work Department, which is the part of the ruling organization that subverts foreign governments, have been developing relations with these quote-unquote friendship organizations. So many of them, especially about 5 of them in South Korea. This infiltration has been so bad that in 2017, it is believed that China established a secret police station in Seoul. As Tara just told us, the Speaker of the Assembly, he went to Beijing on February 5, and in 2023, as Tara talks about, 102 National Assembly legislators signed agreements with China's Communist Party. And by the way, these were not just Minju legislators. These were also legislators from the People Power Party. So really what we have is an infiltration of the 2 main political groups in South Korea. In the early impeachment rallies, which Tara showed you, in the beginning, in early December, right after the declaration of martial law, there were a lot of Chinese faces in these pro-impeachment rallies. When it became an issue in South Korea, when their presence became an issue, they suddenly disappeared. How did that happen? As Tara showed you in one of those images, there are now South Korean policemen, no name tags, acting violently in a way that we have not seen in South Korea. This mimics what we saw in Hong Kong in 2019, a Chinese communist tactic. And so we have to worry that China is now more influential in South Korea than the ruling party. Now, these unusual events bring us back to the way the Chinese view the world. They view South Koreans, Koreans in general, as inferior. You shouldn't feel too bad because they feel that way about everybody else in the world. The difference is, in other countries around the world, leaders say, no, we don't accept that. But in South Korea, as Tara said, they do. And when leaders accept the dominance of China in South Korea, it's possible they will not defend their society against China and against North Korea. So we have seen these unusual events in the last couple months, and we've got to be concerned. Because what this means is that we have a Minju leader, a criminal, Lee Jae-myung. He's a more socialist, more pro-North Korea, more ruthless, more pro-China, and anti-alliance, more anti-American version of Moon Jae-in, the prior president. And what that means is, especially if Yoon Suk-yeol is removed and there's an election and Yi is elected, then we may see the end of the South Korean state. I know that that's hard to accept, but the only way it's not going to end is if you and others take to the streets and raise your voices. Because right now, everything's at risk. Freedom is at risk. Democracy is at risk. The Republic of Korea is at risk. Question: where is the front line of freedom in the world today? The front line of freedom in the world today is the streets of Seoul and other cities in South Korea where people are standing up and they're letting their voices be heard, not only in South Korea, but around the world. So saving South Korea is saving freedom. And we must all do what they say in that banner: save Korea. Thank you very much.